Welcome, everybody. I'm Rob Atkinson. I'm president of ITIF, and we have a really interesting panel this morning, discussion about really this kind of next evolution of IT, and particularly how it's affecting the federal government, how it can affect the federal government, particularly cloud services, but also data analytics and others. So it's really, I think, interesting time in IT, perhaps as interesting as it was back in the late 90s and early 2000s when Congress passed the eGov Act of 2002, sort of similar kinds of transformations going on. So I'm going to introduce everybody really quickly. I'll start here on my left. Terry Halverson is the Chief Information Officer of the Department of the Navy. He heads as the CIO there, as the senior official and advisor on matters related to information management, IT, cyberspace, including national security systems and information resources management. He develops strategies, policies, plans, architecture, standards, guidance, and provides process transformation support for the entire department. He also serves as the department's cyber IT workforce community leader, critical infrastructure assurance officer, the senior military component official for privacy and civil liberties, and also is the Department of Navy's IT cyberspace efficiency lead. So a lot of different roles. Next to Terry is Frank Bateman. Frank is the CIO of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Frank has had a long career in the private and public sectors on IT. Prior to coming to HHS, he served as White House Entrepreneur in Residence on assignment at the Food and Drug Administration, where he helped build the Innovation Pathway 2.0, which is a streamlined process for reg review and approval of innovative medical devices. Earlier, as a CIO of the U.S. Social Security Administration, Frank focused on innovation and citizen-centered service, and he's also co-chaired the Federal CIO Council's Accessibility Committee efforts to improve services for Americans with disabilities. Next is Joe Klemepics, is the CIO and Director of High Performance Computing Communications at NOAA, where he's been since 2007. At NOAA, he's responsible for implementing statutory requirements regarding the acquisition, management, and use of NOAA's information and information technology resources, including NOAA's high performance computing and communications infrastructure. I had the pleasure, I guess, a couple of years ago, being on a federal commission. We went out to the NOAA facility in Colorado, and if you ever get a chance, there's this globe about as big as the room, and it's a real-time weather all around the world, and I assume that's based on some of the work you've been doing.
Science on a Sphere.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Prior to that, he was served in the Department of Defense at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and has over 25 years experience in the federal government. Kyle Keller is the Cloud Business Director of EMC Federal. EMC, as you know, is a major IT company, including storage solutions. He has 17 years experience in the IT industry, including leadership in enterprise architecture, solutions architecture, and hands-on experience delivering large-scale global projects. Currently, he works daily with federal customers on cloud, on IT transformation, and next-generation data centers. David Robinson is the VP and Chief Innovation Officer of SAP Public Sector. He is responsible for defining and executing the innovation roadmap for SAP's federal, civilian, defense, higher education, state markets. And in his 10 years with SAP, he's managed a wide variety of teams, including Director of Global Trade Services and SAP Retail. And lastly, Matt Wood is the General Manager of Data Sciences for Amazon Web Services. We all know of Amazon as a company we are addicted to buy things online and get every day in our home. But what some of us know is that Amazon is a leader in data and web services. Matt leads the technical and scientific computing at Amazon Web Services. His background is actually as he went to medical school and pursued a PhD in bioinformatics at the University of Nottingham. He later joined the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute to work on the Ensemble Genome Browser, which was all about big data and using genomics. He was a contributing author to the book Beautiful Data, published by Media, and he continues to work in next generation sequencing in his role at Amazon Web Services. I joined Amazon Web Services in 2009 as technology evangelist. Senator Carper has joined us now, so we can jump right in. To introduce Senator Carper is J.C. Boggs, who's a partner with King & Spalding.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you everybody for being here. It gives me great pleasure to introduce one of my favorite people in the United States Senate, Tom Carper. I've known him for a long time. We're fellow Delawareans. Mr. Robinson is down here at the end of the table with SAP. As you know, Senator serves on the Finance Committee. He's chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, which oversees our national security and government operations and efficiency. Basically makes sure our government works and serves the taxpayer. He is one of only 2 people in the history of the state of Delaware to serve as congressman, governor, and United States senator. When he was governor, he led the National Governors Association's Center for Best Practices, which focused on developing and implementing innovative solutions to policy challenges faced by states across the nation. And his time in the United States Senate, Senator Carper has worked extensively on ensuring that federal programs are run efficiently and effectively, reducing costs and getting better results. Basically doing more with less, and that's the theme we have here today. The late, great David Broder called him a notably effective and nonpartisan leader, admired and trusted on both sides of the aisle. In his somewhat, almost 40 years in public service, Tom Carper has made a difference. He's made an impact. And as David knows, Delaware is often known as the first state of the Diamond State. It's now known as the C State for Tom Carper. When you think about the delegation, you got Carper, Chris Coons, Carney, and what's Delaware known for? Corporations. Chemicals, chickens, cars, credit cards, and I want to add one more today, cloud computing. So please help me welcome Senator Tom Carper.
Thanks, JC. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks, JC. Good morning. Good morning. Live audience. Great to be with JC. Rob, thank you. To our distinguished panel, nice to see you guys. I love music, and every morning I ride into the Y and into the train station. One I go back and forth just about every day. And the XPN, great radio station in Philadelphia, and they play a lot of really current stuff. But every now and then they mix in some old stuff. And one of the songs they played this morning was Stones, "Hey You, Get Off of My Cloud." I mean, it's just a perfect setup for a plot. This is how we want to get onto. This is how we want to get onto. We rode on the train coming down today. I'm sorry to be a little bit late. We're really interesting. I wanted this place to work. I wanted us to get things done. And we had this good meeting going, kind of pulled together at the last minute with Democrats, Republicans in the Senate, folks in the administration, trying to figure out a good compromise, a common sense compromise on the student loan issue that's before us. The rates just popped up at the end of June from 3.4 to, I think, 6.8%. And we're trying to figure out, is there a way to put in place a permanent student loan program where the rates key off of 10-year Treasury notes. And there's a surcharge for subsidized loans, a somewhat larger surcharge for unsubsidized loans. And you have, so we're trying to work that. Actually made some good progress. I apologize for running a few minutes late, but I was doing, if not the Lord's work, I think the people's work. One of the things that I was on the train today and sat next to this lady, I didn't know her, and I mentioned to her, she was kind of one of the quiet car. She's kind of chatty, but very nice lady. She really annoyed the lady sitting in front of her. I finally said to her, "I got to do my homework. I'm sorry, I like to talk, but we're in the quiet car." And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Do you want to know what I did?" So I made stuff up. I'm a brain surgeon. No, I didn't say that. I finally told her the truth. But she said, "You should speak." I told her I was going to meet with you guys. And she said, "You should talk from the heart. You should just talk from the heart." So I'll talk from the heart. And let me just say, when I was a little boy growing up, born in West Virginia, grew up in Virginia, and my parents went to high school, never went to college, and they expected my sister to go to college. They expected us to figure out how to pay for it. And I won this Navy ROTC scholarship, went off to Ohio State, became a naval flight officer, Southeast Asia, came back and got to go to college, graduate school on GI Bill. Always worked when I was in school, undergrad and graduate. And But I learned the value of spending money wisely, my own money. And I bring that same thought to the federal government. I've been a deficit hawk for a state treasurer, and JC, I mentioned there's been two people in the history of the state who have been a congressman, governor, senator, and led the National Governors Association. That was his grandfather, Caleb Boggs, who was succeeded by Joe Biden back in '72. But he's also one of my great mentors. But I really care a lot about us working well, getting things done, and I care about not wasting money. There are three ways. Sylvia Burwell is going to come over and see you today. I don't know if you've heard of Sylvia Burwell. You'll hear a lot about her in the months to come. She's our new O&B director. She's terrific. Worked Clinton administration, big jobs, good jobs there. Was deputy to Rusty Bowles when we had balanced budget. She was a deputy O&B director when we had balanced budgets 4 in a row. And now she's come out of the private sector and come back to help lead O&B. But she and I are going to meet later today. There's 3 ways to balance her budget. Number 1, entitlement reform. And the president's word, entitlement reform, that saves money, saves these programs for the long haul, and does not savage old people or poor people. That's number 1. Number 2 is revenues. We need some additional revenues. If you go back to the 4 years where we had balanced budgets, the revenues as a percentage of GDP were anywhere from 19.5% to 20.5%. Right in that range. Spending was also between 19.5% and 20.5%. The third thing we need to do is figure out how to get better results for less money in everything we do. I'll say that again, figure out how to get better results for less money in everything that we do. And what we need is a culture of thrift in the federal government. And I get to lead this committee, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, with Tom Coburn, who's our ranking Republican. And got a bunch of people, John McKee and others on the committee, who really are rabid about the waste. I have people, when I talk to them about we need some additional revenues along with entitlement reform, and so there's culture change. I have a lot of people say to me, I don't mind paying a little more in taxes, I just don't want you to waste my money. I hear that a lot. I don't mind paying more in taxes, I just don't want you to waste my money. As it turns out, to the rescue comes technology. And I'm just going to mention three applications that I think are especially interesting. I was down on the border of Texas, Mexico about 2 months ago, and it was about 10 p.m. at night, and I was at one of these big ports of entry. We had thousands of trucks come in, huge commerce going across the border day and night. It was about 10 p.m. I'm standing next to a Customs and Border Protection officer, a woman, and they've got a long line of trucks waiting to come into the U.S. She has a device just a little bit bigger than this in her hand. It's called an Elmo. And I said, what is that? And she said, this Elmo takes me to the next 7 trucks that are coming through. They have a license plate reader that actually said, and she said, tells me the next 7 trucks coming through, tells me who's driving the trucks, the travel history of those trucks going across the border in the last 2 months, the travel history of the drivers coming across the border. She said, all right, here's your hit a button. It says, this is a truck that's coming through right now, this is a driver, this history. They have a trusted traveler program, so that we have the ability to actually know which trucks, which drivers, which companies are less likely to have contraband, drugs, that sort of thing, and it can come through in a trusted travel program, much like we can now start to do in the airport. We have in Delaware a program called, as Jenny knows, we have a program called Johnson & Johnson idea, called Text for Babies. One of the problems we have in making sure that kids get the kind of health care, especially in Medicaid families, where there's not as much parental involvement, maybe not as much parental knowledge. We have Text for Babies. Almost everybody has a cell phone. And what we now do in Delaware is when a child, Medicaid family, child's due for physical checkup, inoculations, vaccinations, whatever it is, we use the text system. And we're going to do the same thing on our immigration law. For people who come here on a tourist visa, and they're a month out from expiring, not the person, but their visa. If they're on a visitor's visa, they're on a student visa, they're on a work visa, we're going to use Text for Babies, just the same application, and using the cell phones. The other thing, I'm a veteran, some of you are as well, and we have, VA came up with this electronic health records idea, 20 years ago. And we now do it rather broadly throughout our healthcare delivery system. Unfortunately, when you move from, and when you're on active duty in the military, they have an electronic health program as well for active duty personnel. And then we have a separate one for VA. Unfortunately, they don't talk to each other. And one of the biggest cost drivers right now in defense spending is healthcare costs for veterans and for our families. We need to do a much better job in terms of harnessing electronic technology in the delivery of healthcare and being able to seamlessly transfer people from active duty system to the VA system. Save money, better healthcare results for less money. Those are just a couple of things. The stuff that we can do to save money and actually save the taxpayers money, but provide better service is just almost without limit. And when I think about what y'all are doing here today, I think you're help us continue to do more of that and to do that better and more quickly. So I thank you for pulling everybody together today. Thank you, JC, for inviting me. Rob, thank you for being a moderator. And to all of you, thank you for helping us change the course of America. I'll close with this. Navy. Anybody in the military here? Anybody former military? Any former Navy people? In the Navy, when you're doing something pretty hard, we'd say it was hard to do, it took a long time. We'd say it's like changing the course of an aircraft carrier. But if you work on it, you stick with it long enough, you can change the course of an aircraft carrier. In naval aviation, we're doing something especially difficult. We would liken it to changing an aircraft engine while you're in flight. Think about that. That was a really hard job to do. But changing the culture from a culture of spendthrift to a culture of thrift is a hard thing to do. But if we stick with it, don't shrink from it, and push forward, we can do that. The President, the administration is about to launch a management agenda, which is going to rely hugely on technology, And so I'll say thank you. You're doing the Lord's work as well, and we're grateful for that. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Carper. I'd be remiss if I didn't also recognize Garth Spencer here, who works with Senator Carper and the Government Affairs Committee, and it's just been a pleasure to work with over the years, and does a great job for the committee and for the state of Delaware. Senator, I was also in London last weekend, and the Stones actually played on a Saturday night at about 80,000 people in Hyde Park, but they're not looking so good. That sounds so good either. So even all the technology we have, it just wasn't sufficient.
I hope I can just still sit up and take nourishment when I'm as old as Mick Jagger.
Well, we have Congressman Connolly. I don't know if you want to maybe get some of this. Got 2 minutes?
So thank you. I think what we'll do is, just so we keep the ball moving here, Congressman Connolly will join us in a few minutes, but why don't we just start, and we can jump right in, and then when the Congressman comes, we can segue back. So why don't we start with Terry, start off with your thoughts on what's going on in the Navy and how you're seeing this?
Well, first, I would be ready to say, so far, with our efforts, thank you. With our efforts in the Navy, we have Department of Navy, technology. How many of us does it take to operate the mic? The Department of Navy, which represents the Navy and the Marine Corps, we have pulled to date $2 billion out of our IT spend. We will begin to take some more. And I think the message that I would leave you with is, within IT, there is not going to be a single answer. We're going to talk some about cloud today, and cloud is certainly something we're going to use to lower our costs and improve the mission. But what you want to have to do in IT is look at what are all of the tools you have, and the problem with IT is how long does the tool last? It's a perishable environment. So you're going to have to continually question what you're doing. And I would say that's probably the biggest cultural change we have to make, and that IT requires us to set a business plan, and the day you sign the business plan and you move forward, you got to start looking at what's the next business plan to move forward on. How do you keep pace with both the technology and the process changes that technology enables? So one of the things that we're looking at hard in the Department of Navy is, how do we partner with the commercial sector? How do we take advantage of the technology changes that are out there today? How do we take advantage of the process changes? And I would say this, and I get a little trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. At the Department of Navy, I do not want to be on the bleeding edge in most cases of technology. There's some places I want to be. What I want to be is in the sweet spot of technology. The Department of Navy, if it was a Fortune 500 company, depending on what acquisition was happening today, we would be Fortune 2 or 3. Okay? We're a big company. And we do every business. There's very few businesses we're not in. We're in shipping, we're in food, we're in... Each of those businesses have some different IT criteria, and then there's some baselines the same. So where we want to be is taking advantage of what the commercial technology has proven to be effective technology to get the mission done at lowest cost. So we went into cloud. Some of you are aware, we signed a contract with Amazon to put our public-facing data into an Amazon cloud. I will freely say that saved us roughly 50% of our initial cost by leveraging what Amazon does. Now, can all of my data go into a public-facing cloud run by Amazon? No, it cannot. The key to, I think, all of the things we're doing today is understanding the value of your data, and value has a couple factors in it. Part of it is what's the security of the data, what's the risk of the data, in other words, that you're going to put out there. Who needs to see the data? And one of the things you heard in my notes, I'm also the privacy and FOIA officer for the Department of Navy. Well, if I have data that is FOIAble or exposable by privacy, data I have to give to the public, maybe that's part of the equation that says that data ought to be out in public places. I have to give it to them anyway. So we're looking at all of that to determine what's the best mix of commercial, government combinations, government only, to both not just store the data, but to set it up for access to the right groups, people, and how do you share it? We'll talk a little bit about big data. Big data has a lot of potential. Big data also has a lot of potential to cost you a lot of money. I would tell you that big data today, if you did a big business case on all big data, it wouldn't be a very fulfilling case today. That doesn't mean there's not promise, but it means you have to understand what your data is, where your data is going, who uses it, and when do you use it. I mean, some data you only access very infrequently. That probably needs a different storage, different arrangement than data you're doing transactions on every day. So that's all of the things we're looking at in the department. And we really do believe we have to partner in the right ways with the commercial world, and that we will be a big partner with the commercial world as we move forward. It is going to be a blended environment where we're using almost every blend you can think to do the business of the Department of Navy, so that we are spending less money and getting more value. It's not just spending less money. That's easy to do. Very easy to spend less money, just take money out. Spending money, less money, and getting better value is the equation. That's a little harder to do, and that's what we are ruthlessly pursuing. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Terry. And we'll come back to some of those themes a little bit later, particularly around privacy. Frank?
Sure, thanks. So the theme of today was talking about big data, digital government, and cloud computing. And I guess I look at those three things as Rob said at the very beginning, as sort of being a point in time that takes me back to the late 90s when the internet was coming of age. And it was a very exciting time. These things are very exciting for government, in part because we found ourselves in government in a very difficult situation where we're not getting the most for the money that we're spending. We could do much better with our investments. And that's what we're focused on in HHS and across government. When I talk to my peers at other federated, large cabinet agencies, we're all trying to get more for our money, and we can do it. The neat thing about these technologies that I've just mentioned, though, is that they enable us to get more for our money. In part because we find ourselves, as I said, in a difficult situation. How do we get in this situation? I've spent some time thinking about, and I think it's really because we're optimizing at sort of a suboptimal level. The appropriations process, we all know, asks program managers across our federal government to do certain things. When they get those tasks, they go out and they buy IT, and they don't look at what other IT exists. Trying to get that governance back across the federal government is the challenge that we face, and I think when you look at solutions like cloud computing, it presents an opportunity for us to let them maintain control over the programs that are important, And most importantly, it allows us to get more for less money and let that money then go back into the mission. Not focus on the technology, but focus on the program. It's important for us to have an enterprise view in the federal government, in our large federated agencies, and that has been a challenge. I think that cloud-based computing, in fact, presents a compelling case for having that enterprise-wide view. Most importantly, though, cloud computing presents simplicity. It really gives you an opportunity to say, listen, I need to stand up a system, I need to move that system online, I have a bunch of users, and I don't have to worry about standing up an infrastructure. I don't have to worry about the security once we do things like FedRAMP. At HHS, I'm sure many of you know, we recently did an ATO for Amazon, and that's being taken advantage of across the federal government at this point. People are really excited by that. But the real excitement is the simplicity of that cloud-based solution, because others can just simply take a look at it and say, we like what HHS did, we trust it, and we're going to do the same thing, and we're not going to repeat that security process. We're not going to build redundant infrastructure. We're simply going to stand that system up and let it run in the cloud. We chose Amazon because we had a number of systems running in Amazon across the department. This is just the beginning, though. We see many more opportunities to go to other cloud service providers and create an even more competitive environment out there so that the government is getting the best deal in standing up those systems. What we're hoping to do at HHS and where we're heading right now is to in fact build a portal that our employees can use as they stand up systems, and that portal will have a number of cloud service providers available to them, and the terms and conditions will all be worked out, the contracts will all be worked out, and the security will all be worked out in advance, so they can simply go ahead and stand up those systems with minimal friction. That is going to have a huge impact on HHS and the federal government, because it allows us to facilitate our programs doing their mission without having them focus on the technology that they have had to focus on up until now. I think this is actually a watershed event, and it's pretty exciting. I just want to touch on three things that I think are really important as underpinning the cloud. One is governance. It's getting that enterprise-wide view that I mentioned, and I think the cloud plays very nicely into a better governance structure. Second is economics. As we all know, we're in a fiscally challenging climate right now, and the cloud presents a really interesting opportunity for us to move from a capital expenditure, a CapEx environment, to an OpEx environment. I think that is huge because it becomes a predictable expense that we have to run our programs. We know years in advance what the cost is going to be when we're negotiating, let's say, a 5-year contract for email in the cloud. And finally, security. The cloud plays very nicely into security because assuming nothing changes and you have certified cloud service provider for security, that remains a certified cloud service provider, and you can keep going back without having to certify each system as we do right now, which is terribly expensive. Put aside the expense, it's time consuming, and it makes government not so agile. It makes us very sluggish in modernizing. The cloud is going to change that. One of the things that I continue to point out as we look to move our systems to the cloud is we go through cycles in government right now where we invest a lot of money in hardware, we invest a lot of money bringing systems integrators in to stand up the infrastructure, and then 3 to 5 years later, we have to do it again because the hardware goes away, because the software vendor has decided that it's time for a modernization, and we have to go through a huge CapEx investment again. That goes away when we simply outsource it, and that creates a really compelling business case. So those are kind of my views, right?
Thank you. We've been joined by Congressman Conway, so we'll just segue over to that. And JC, if you would be kind enough to introduce the Congressman.
Thanks, Rob. We were joined by Senator Carper this morning, who's a great leader in the Senate. We're fortunate today to also be joined by Congressman Connolly, who's a great leader in the House on IT reform issues. He's currently serving his third term in the U.S. House of Representatives and currently serves on both the House Foreign Relations Committee and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where he is the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Government Operations. Representative Connolly has built a reputation as a results-oriented legislator who does his homework. Since being elected, Representative Connolly championed, introduced, and passed the Bipartisan Telework Enhancement Act, which requires the federal government to increase the use of telework by federal employees to ensure continuity of operations during emergency situations. He's focused on finding savings, like Senator Carper, in federal IT procurement and data center consolidation at a time of fiscal austerity and tight budgets. It's never been more important for the federal government to drive efficiencies and cost savings through its acquisition and deployment of information technology. Representative Connolly has been a true leader with regard to federal IT acquisition reform. Again, please help me welcome Congressman Connolly. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, and forgive me, panelists, for interrupting your panel discussion. We're in the middle of a hearing on our committee on my side, so I broke away from the hearing, but I got to return. So it's great to be with you today. I got to say, I stand before you today feeling that the federal government has slackened in its embrace of the 25-point program laid out by Vivek Kundra. We had a subcommittee hearing on data center consolidation, seemingly an innocuous topic, but it was OMB refused to participate in the hearing. GSA refused to participate in the hearing. It was in my district. It was friendly territory. It's not a hostile hearing to the administration. And when we looked at the results, the metrics, we understood maybe why. Most federal agencies had no progress to report whatsoever on data center consolidation. At the time, GSA had 0 data center consolidations to report and 0 pending. Within a week or two of the hearing, they suddenly announced 76 data centers were going to be collected. And then within a few weeks of that hearing, OMB announced that there were an additional 3,000 data centers that hadn't even been reported. So we're up to 6,000. If you look at the top 3 must-move requirements that were set out by the 25-point plan by Vivek Kundra to the cloud, the federal government has failed to report on any of those agencies complying with that requirement. It's supposed to be done by 2012, 2013, and it hasn't happened. And so I'm disappointed in the federal government. And this matters because if you look at, we spend $81 billion a year on IT acquisition and maintenance. At least 20 of it is sort of lost. It's sunk costs in old, antiquated, and legacy systems. I like to joke that the fact that we still have some systems around COBOL technology, those under a certain age don't even know what I'm talking about. The good news about that, though, is though it costs money, the Chinese do not know how to hack into COBOL. So maybe we ought to reinvest in COBOL. But the federal government needs to be seized for the mission here. And if there's anything that could help drive that mission to some passion, it is sequestration. Sequestration is going to, if it lasts the full 10 years, is going to be one of the largest contractions in the history of the federal government. Comparable to stand-downs after wars. Only maybe bigger because it's across the board in terms of the federal government. It's $1.2 trillion. And we're already seeing the effect of that in terms of furloughs and things federal agencies no longer can do or that they're eliminating or cutting back. And the only thing that's going to, if that stays for the full 10 years, I hope it does not, but if it does, it's technology. It's technology that's going to help us, whether it's data center consolidation, moving aggressively to the cloud, streamlining how we're organized in terms of management. If you look at the top 26 federal agencies, there are 250 people plus with the title CIO. And I guarantee you what happens with that kind of system is this. Nobody's responsible, no one's accountable, no one's really in charge. And it's very hard to sort of have a locus that's infused with, enabling power to make decisions and to stand responsible for them. We passed a bill on the defense bill that was introduced by Chairman Issa and myself. The Issa Connolly bill is supposed to be a 20-year replacement after 20 years of Clinton or Cohen in trying to help the federal government better manage this $81 billion a year we spend in IT. One of the things it does is have a CIO who is infused with authority and responsibility and accountability in terms of making IT acquisition and maintenance kinds of decisions. We'll see how that works, but we've got to streamline our management to make sure that we're actually getting a return on this huge investment we make in the federal government. And there's so much more the federal government can and should be doing. And we're going to, certainly in our subcommittee, try to urge them along with bills like Batara, but also with hearings to try to make sure that there is some accountability and to ensure that there's progress. Vivek Kundra and Anish Chopra, when they were in the administration, were real visionaries and I think laid out a plan which, if implemented, would make the government a lot more efficient in its deployment of IT assets and more effective. And as I said, sequestration, while an enormous challenge and while a mindless approach to management, which I find odd for a crowd that says the government should be run more like a business. What business would trash its employees in public as being incompetent, overpaid, lazy, duplicative, redundant, and then freeze their salaries for 3 years, cut back on their benefit package, threaten to cut back a lot more, and wonder why we have a dysfunctional government? And good luck in going to college campuses and recruiting for, I think what you ought to do, Bob, is a 30-year career with the President's Service. It's fun, it's exciting, and you'll be furloughed for the next 3 months. The devastation of furloughing as a management principle, I don't know a CEO in the private sector, and I worked in the private sector for 20 years, who would ever get away with that behavior. He or she would be fired. No corporate board would put up with that. That's not how you get productivity. But that's the climate we're in. So we've got to make IT work for us. And maybe therein is the opportunity, because we can achieve efficiencies, we can try to compensate for absolute loss in aggregate of investment streams as the federal government continues to contract, while trying to make sure that we're providing quality services to the people we serve. So I think there's great hope, I think there's a great opportunity, but at the moment, I feel the federal government has, as an entity, has fallen behind in what had been an exciting opportunity to actually catch up. So my hope is that as we move forward, all of us can try to find ways to encourage and exhort and pressure the federal government to come into the 21st century with IT management changes and allocation and investment changes that will better serve the country. So FITARA, the bill I co-authored, is one big attempt by Congress to do just that. It was bipartisan legislation. Anyone who knows the relationship I have with Darrell Issa, it was quite a shock that there was something that was called the Issa Connolly bill. We don't see eye to eye on very many things, but we did see eye to eye on this one. And so it brought together Republicans and Democrats. And that's also a hopeful sign that in this area, at least, we're not at odds about what needs to be done. So I'm hopeful for the future, but we've got to have some leadership within the federal family that galvanizes us, focuses us, and takes advantage of what seems like a very challenging environment, but within those challenges there are lots of opportunities. So that's my message with you this morning. Thank you so much for having me, and keep up the great work.
I think we have time for just a couple of questions, particularly folks from the media want to ask a couple or yes, sir, back here.
Yes, John Weiler, IT Acquisition Advisory Council. Sir, there seems to be great promise for cloud and all these things, as you say, but fundamentally what we see as the impediment is the acquisition process that's designed for waterfall design spec approaches keeps being the impediment. Have you any thoughts about how to fix the process so that the benefits of clouds could be acquired in our lifetimes?
I think, necessity is the mother of inventions. I think some of the fiscal pressure on federal agencies can be a boost in accelerating the move to cloud. Again, however, we've got to have a focal point that is pressing federal agencies. We're going to do our part by insisting on metrics and insisting that people come and report on implementation. What do you mean you haven't done anything? What do you mean you didn't meet the requirement of moving fast on 3 by this year? What are you doing about data center consolidation? What kind of progress have you made in that? And what are you doing in collaboration with the private sector to move to the cloud? As I walked in, you were talking about FedRAMP and what an exciting prospect FedRAMP represents, and I agree with that. But keep in mind, since FedRAMP started, only 4 companies have been certified. Only 4. This is glacial speed, and it has to be streamlined and sped up if we're going to take advantage of tools like FedRAMP, because I share your enthusiasm, but surely we can do better than qualifying 4 companies for it.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Mike Nelson, Bloomberg Government.
I might.
We've written a lot about how the PRISM revelations and worries about NSA snooping in the cloud is causing many companies to think twice about moving to the cloud. How are we going to address that? And not just for federal agencies, but for corporations and our foreign allies.
Boy, that's, I don't have an easy answer for that. But I do think we're going to, let me put that in the whole area of cybersecurity, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges and threats we as a country face. I mean, it is on par with terrorism. I noticed this morning on Morning Joe that they were interviewing a former senator who's written a book called Gridlock, but it's about cybersecurity attack on the grid system in America and the consequences that flow from a successful cybersecurity attack. We need to define the boundaries of privacy. We need to set parameters for federal entities empowered to look at certain databases in the fight against terrorism. I favor coming down on a more restrictive side rather than a rather liberal side. I don't mean that in political terms, because I am worried about the protection of civil liberties. We can't buy into the proposition that in order to protect our civil liberties, we have to compromise them. I believe that's a false choice, and we should not, as Americans, accept that proposition. And we should be pressing intelligence and security agencies to explain themselves and to account for themselves and to set limits, and if they can't do it, we do it for them. So I'm very pleased we're having that debate. I'm not a big fan of what Snowden did, because some people see him as a hero. In the past, whistleblowers, I'm of an age where I remember Daniel Ellsberg. He stayed here and took the consequences, which could have been very dire for him. I won't question motivation, but if we can't have a system where, depending on your personal political views, you get to violate the secrecy oath you took. So if I'm a libertarian, I have one set of standards that offends me, and I get to leak that data, that information, as I see fit as an individual. And if I'm a liberal, I have a different set of standards. And if I'm a conservative, I have yet another. And if I'm a Tea Party person, I have even yet another. And if I'm an anarchist, I get to have a whole bunch of standards. And so we have, hundreds of thousands of people with security clearances who individually are empowered to compromise intelligence and data they're privy to based on their personal predilections and beliefs. That's chaos. That can't work. So we know we have to set some parameters, but they need to be, from an American point of view, fairly strict. Now let me move to cybersecurity, because again, the federal government is not well equipped to handle cybersecurity. The number of attacks in the last 4 years alone have gone up over 700%. And in the original bill, what we measured was, for federal agencies, we set a metric that was easy, in a sense. Make sure everyone in your agency takes training to be educated and aware. So when we had hearings a few years ago, every federal agency trot up to the Hill and proudly said 87% of our workforce has been made aware and educated. You think, well, all right, but how many, isn't the goal here to stop cyber attacks? And how you doing in that regard? Well, they've grown exponentially. And it affects every phase of the federal government. By the way, it affects the private sector. I was talking with the Bank of America. Last year, one bank, a big one, but one, had 122 million cyber attacks. One bank. Now, how does anyone, public or private sector, marshal the resources and the talent and the know-how to counter that kind of just systematic attack from the outside, or sometimes from the inside? And I'll give you a public sector example. This was stunning to me, and a lot of it involves cyber, cyber attacks really, because of electronic transfer. The IRS, in 4 years ago, the IRS had documented 54,000 cases across the country of identity theft. People, getting into the net and stealing your identity to make sure that the tax refund was transferred to them, not you, for example. Last year, 4 years later, 1.4 million. When I asked, well, how many have been prosecuted? Surely, as a deterrent, 4 was the answer. 4 prosecutions because of IRS identity theft after 1.4 million. In other words, the probability of your getting caught and prosecuted is virtually nil. The old expression, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, why do you hack into IRS? Because that's where the money is. And there's almost no possibility of punitive action. So we've got some work to do. And it's not just in national security. It's also in domestic programs where, frankly, we are not up to the game. And a lot of the domain expertise is in the private sector, and those partnerships have to be accelerated. Yeah?
Just before you came in, I'm sorry, Wyatt Cash.
It's got to be really quick because we've got to.
Wyatt
I gotta
Cash,
go.
Information Week. Before you came in, the comment was made that one of the challenges for efficiency is the appropriations process, and so there's lots of streams flowing in lots of places. So even with your bill having one CIO, how do you see your efforts trying to rein in this mismatch of appropriations that tends to stifle smarter enterprise technology efforts?
Well, now you're getting into the dysfunctionality of Congress, and that's a whole different panel of discussion, I think. Obviously, Congress itself has enormous work to do to get itself up to speed and to focus on these issues. You have a hearing on data center consolidation or moving to the cloud. Maybe one stray reporter who has an interest in it is there with a notebook. The Klieg lights and the television cameras and the radio stations and all the celebrity media personalities are down the hall at the Benghazi hearing or, the IRS scandal hearing. And now maybe that's a good thing that we can sort of do this in a quiet room where, we can actually reflect on the problem, but we're not there yet. So we have a lot of work to do in educating members of Congress about the challenge and the threat. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm sorry again, panelists, for interrupting your panel. Thank you.
So I think this is just as popular as the Benghazi hearing in my opinion. So, all right, so we'll get, thank you again, Congressman, for those comments and your leadership on these issues, and we'll just get right back into it with Joe. Before you start, I was going to say, there's folks in the back, there's seats up here. Feel free to come on up and grab a chair.
All right, good morning. Public counts on NOAA to deliver relevant and accurate and timely information to protect the lives and livelihoods. And if you're unfamiliar with NOAA, our area of responsibility is pretty broad. It's the surface of the sun. We put out the daily weather forecast for the sun and to the bottom of the oceans. So we have unmanned vehicles in the bottom of the oceans, and we're exploring that. So it's pretty broad. And the fulfillment of this mission requires us to observe, collect, process, evaluate, analyze, disseminate, archive very vast quantities of environmental information. And information technology is absolutely critical to integrate it to virtually every aspect of this mission value chain, whether it be weather, climate, ecosystems, fisheries, ocean activities. Information technology is absolutely critical to managing this information and adding value and protecting lives and livelihoods. So my goal as a CIO is really, as both the Senator and Congressman really focused in on, is making sure that we're provisioning the most cost-effective, secure, agile technology services that propel NOAA's mission. And I believe really the best way to do this is through enterprise-wide shared services. And to a great extent, I believe we've had a lot of success in doing this using cloud computing. And I believe that NOAA is a leader out there in cloud computing, whether it be taking advantage of public cloud services, community or hybrid or even private arrangements. So we certainly believe in the cloud computing business model. I think it's a phenomenal business model. Again, very rapid. I don't want to hear about developing things in the cloud. Show me that you got to provision it right now, and I want to see a demo. But it's very rapid, but it's also very flexible and scalable. I can't imagine a better way to go in terms of wanting to have a lot of capability right away that can scale for future demand. It also enforces a fee-for-service model. And we talk about OpEx to CapEx to OpEx, but I'm trying to move almost entirely to a fee-for-service kind of thing. So basically buying services, taking our customers' requirements, taking their funding, and making sure they're getting the best possible service. And that really is a fee-for-service model, and cloud computing fits in fantastically with that model. And again, the economies of scale are fantastic with cloud computing, unrivaled. So our NOAA's cloud strategy really leverages OMB's cloud-first policy. We want to evaluating safe and secure cloud solutions before making any new investment. And people really do, and I'm speaking honestly, want to move things to the cloud because of a lot of the issues that Terry and Frank talked about. Is how do you support this infrastructure? And again, if we can move to a fee-for-service leveraging cloud, I think it's a more sustainable business model. But the first thing we're trying to do is to evaluate our existing services to ensure that we actually need them to, or they're really providing the value that we're spending on them. Software as a service is a priority because everything's, we basically have the entire stack with that. But we're also looking to consolidate and use infrastructure and platform as a service solutions across NOAA. But we want to do it in a coordinated way, not everybody out there doing everything on their own. We want to make sure that we know where our information is and it's being protected and managed well. 3 success stories real quickly. December of 2011, we moved 25,000 mailboxes and accounts to Google's cloud-based email. Again, it was calendar collaboration services. And at the time, we were the largest federal agency to move email to the cloud with our 25,000 accounts. We think that we saved 50%, half the cost in terms of if we had to provision it ourselves. We have some pretty good metrics in this. And so, again, great capability at a very significantly reduced price. We're in the process of moving all of our Tier 1 service desks to consolidation in the cloud, the technology in the cloud, the people in the cloud. And it's based on ServiceNow technology, but we will be the first government agency to move all of our Tier 1, and we've got a lot of them, Tier 1 service desks to the cloud and the people. So nothing will be on premise.
And again, what we're doing is we're accepting GSA's testing results for this technology, but we're doing our own risk acceptance, risk assessment for our environment. I think it's a pretty good model. The third item is mobile device management. We're implementing FiberLink's Models 360 to manage our mobile devices. Again, cloud-based, enterprise-wide, fully integrated with mobile device management capability. And this again allows us to move beyond our standard iPhones, iPads, to other devices, allowing greater productivity, allowing people to bring in the devices they're comfortable with and tailor to the needs. And well, cloud, and again I have to say this, cloud computing, cloud solutions are fantastic. You're not going to find a greater supporter than me in talking about cloud solutions, but I think we also need to talk about the challenges. And while I believe that ultimately they can provide and do provide more security, security is probably the number one challenge, because we still need the documentation, we still need to understand how our information is being protected, privacy is a concern, so there's a host of security concerns that we need to work through. Contracts, negotiating terms of service, implementing SLAs with teeth. You can always, if you don't like the service, you're not getting what you think you need, you can always not renew an option, but we want to do something to remediate the situation. Networking, you're talking about moving lots of information. We have, we're kind of a poster child for big data, so we're talking about moving a lot of information very rapidly, and again, in the cloud scenario, that's the challenge. And I'll just close with saying the workforce is something that we need potentially different skill sets, more program management, more acquisition, more business skills than hands-on IT expertise as we move to the cloud. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt?
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, thanks. I represent Amazon Web Services, for those of you who missed the introductions. And Amazon is probably best known as an online retailer. In fact, actually, just quick show of hands, who here has an Amazon account for buying books? Everybody, good. So the good news is you're good to go with better people. So although we're probably best known for our retail operations, we're actually a technology company at heart, and a part of our remit is to invent and innovate and simplify technology on behalf of our customers so that they can go off and build sophisticated, wonderful, scalable applications. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through Amazon Web Services. This is a separate part of the business, separate from the retail side of the business, so this isn't leftover capacity from Christmas or anything like that. It's a completely separate part of the business. And our remit there in Amazon Web Services is to provide scalable infrastructure, so compute, storage, databases, that are available as if they were a utility. So we want compute and IT resources to be so cheap that people don't think about when they're using them. Just like you don't think about the cost of turning a light on or running a washing machine, we don't want customers to have to think about the cost of computing. And there's a couple of ways that we deliver these services. A couple of core characteristics, really. So they're all available on demand, so you can just jump up onto our website and spin up and provision anything that you need, whether it's a gigabyte or a petabyte of storage or huge amounts of compute, whatever you need. And they're all available on a pay-as-you-go basis. So the metered billing that you would expect and see with a utility is there with our utility computing platform as well. And the benefits of that technology really come not from the scale and the elasticity, but really come from the way in which customers use it and the value that it provides to customers. And the highest, most important thing from an economic perspective is that it moves customers from a capital expenditure model, into an operational expenditure model. And they move from having to provision very large amounts of infrastructure in some case, and pay for all of that infrastructure up front, and then move that to a more pay-as-you-go model, where you don't have that upfront initial barrier to getting work done. You can just spin up what you need and only pay for it as and when you're using it. And if you switch it off, then you stop paying for it. So that move from capital investment to operational expenditure, as we've heard from some of the other panelists, is a key economic driver for the adoption of cloud computing. The other thing that we're able to do at Amazon is we're able to provide lower operational prices and lower operational expense than many companies are capable of doing on their own. And the reason for that is that we have large economies of scale, and we take advantage of those economies of scale to drive our prices down routinely. So we have a flywheel that we like to spin. We have a virtuous circle that we like to spin in Amazon Web Services. And that is that we have customers that are running on the platform. And we have hundreds of thousands of customers across 190 countries. We have 300 government agencies using Amazon Web Services. And the more customers we have, the more infrastructure we have to provision and rack and stack and power on our end in order to support those customers. And the more infrastructure that we buy and provision ourselves, the lower the cost of doing so. So we can go to our own hardware vendors and custom design that hardware. We can make sure there's not USB ports and sound cards and all those sort of things on our servers. We can make sure they're exactly what we need, and we buy at sufficient scale because our growth is fast enough that we can get better economies of scale there. And what we're committed to doing is passing the savings of those economies of scale back onto our customers in the form of lower prices. And hopefully what that will result in is lower prices, we'll get more customers onto the platform, and the whole thing spins round and round and round. So the quicker we're able to do that, the better it is for everybody. And we're able to inject energy into this flywheel in various different ways through the partner ecosystem and better self-service experience and all those sort of things. But being able to, I mean, we could absorb those lower costs on our end as profit, but we choose to pass them back onto our customers because we have an internal motivation to enable customer success and to enable lower cost of innovation for our government customers. So this flywheel really drives everything that we do internally. The other thing that it gives our customers is tremendous flexibility to experiment. Because you move into this operational model, the cost of experimentation is much, much lower. Let's say, for example, you were working with the 1,000 genome data set. This is the largest collection of human genetic variation in the world. It's a 300 terabyte data set. If I'm a PI, even inside a large organization, and I just want to start experimenting with that, I have to go off and provision a huge amount of storage just to start experimenting with it. Then I have to download it. Then I have to queue up the servers to start asking questions of that data. This is a huge barrier to innovation. Compared to making that data available on the cloud, we work with the NIH to make sure it's updated weekly, and we make it available to customers for free. They just pay for the compute and the experimentation with that data. They can then come in, spin up the infrastructure that they need, experiment with that data at an extremely low cost, and start getting value from that information. So the cost of experimentation starts to fall dramatically when you move from this capital model into this operational model, and having on-demand access to those resources, and having those on-demand access to the resources next to large amounts of data that you can start deriving value from. So being able to pull all of that together starts to facilitate experimentation, and starts to facilitate innovation. And it creates extremely agile, extremely responsive environments for our customers. They don't have to go off and ask and provision. We've talked to customers who have 6 to 9 month lead times on provisioning new hardware. This is not an environment for experimentation, not an environment for innovation. We can spin up new servers in minutes. And we can make those available at very, very high scale, so you can do whatever it is that you want. And because you're only paying for those as and when you need them, when you stop using them, you just shut them down and you stop paying for it.
To wrap up, Matthew.
All right, thanks. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I did want to touch on just a couple of points around portals. So we mentioned the success of using portals as a sort of mediation device for using cloud computing. And I just want to say that's been a very, very successful model. Basically providing cloud computing through a mediated portal where you are able to set up all the security that you need in one place, and then just have your users come in and access the service from that one place. And we have customers that are driving very secure workloads, HIPAA-style workloads in those sort of environments, where their internal people can just start working, knowing that they can put sensitive information in there without having to go through the checks and balances every time.
Great, thank you. David.
Good morning. Before I usually start getting into talking about cloud computing or innovation, I'd like to just get a general sense of the audience in terms of, just with a quick show of hands, are people familiar with SAP? With who is SAP or has had experience, very positive experience with SAP? No one on the panel raise your hand.
Not mine.
Thank you. I completely agree with everything that was just covered here, because that's kind of the magic about cloud computing. And it's what's fun about kind of working in the innovation stream here at SAP, because every single day, the cloud computing changes in terms of what people are excited about, why people are adopting it, how people are applying it to real outcomes. And conversations can range anywhere from, it allows me to do more with less, because I can consolidate data centers, and I can share a cost across the community and be able to lower my IT costs. But what's really, really powerful is the whole new range of outcomes that are really available because of cloud computing, and frankly, the convergence of cloud with mobility and with big data. Each one of those is very exciting and warrants a panel onto its own subject, but really when those three things converge is really where the magic happens. That's where innovation happens. And every single time we talk with a customer, whether they're in the private sector, in the commercial space, retail, or a chemical company, or in the public sector, K through 12 school district, or a federal agency, for someone else in a state government, they all get really excited about the new outcome, the new things that are possible. There was a little bit of a discussion around change of CapEx to OpEx, and that's kind of like the really nice value engineering approach to cloud computing. You can say, I don't need to buy a lot of expensive hardware, this can be made obsolete before I can install it, and I have a lot of software to install over a period of time. I can go ahead and share that cost and move over to an OpEx model. But really what's happening is there's a migration past that to really being able to pay for outcomes. Being able to understand that IT is an enabler, and it helps enable efficiency and of outcomes, and outcomes that serve citizens, communities, customers, constituents. So being able to better align how the IT investment is enabling that outcome allows you to improve the outcome, do more with less. And it's really more about that than it is simply just switching to a new financial model around OpEx, because that's easier to manage in budget cycles. So that's kind of way, way, way out in front, but that's what we're seeing, that's what I'm seeing. The other thing that's interesting about cloud computing is in addition to just sharing the cost or sharing resources or being able to plan for peaks and high availability and unlikely events at certain times a year that you require peaks. Really, it's the collaboration. It's the ability to bring data together from many different people. One of my favorite new apps is I won't mention the app name, but it's an app that basically tracks traffic. It's able to show you in real time where you are, it follows you, but it also shows you where there's accidents, where there's red light cameras, where there's speed traps, where there's different things that actually might interest you based on your past history of stops and searches and so forth. And I guess what I'm really saying is that that's only possible because of the convergence of mobility. Thousands and thousands of people around me, all sharing their current experience and information through a secure mobile connection back to a cloud server that then is being continually managed and being analyzed around big data and then delivered back to me for what I'm looking for, which is to get to point A to point B as safely, quickly, and efficiently as possible, and that's really the outcome. So, that's what we're talking about when SAP goes in and sits down with a potential client or a customer. That's why we're really focused on this concept that we refer to as design thinking. Design thinking gets away from IT for its own sake, or focusing on IT as something that's a necessary evil or something that you actually need to spend a lot of time invested in. It's really to get to the heart of the matter, which is what are you trying to deliver as an organization? Are you trying to deliver better citizen services, better educational outcomes, better teaching experience in the classroom? Are you providing money to farmers? Are you providing information to banks to help them be able to manage liquidity risk more effectively, et cetera? So really focusing on the outcomes is probably the one area where we feel that there's the most room for the innovation. And it's really kind of to Matt's point, the ability to have lower cost and less risk around experimentation, and the ability to do that in a very iterative process across many different smart people. This concept of crowdsourcing, crowd sharing, allows you to bring the best and brightest ideas as quickly as possible to the fore
allow them to be adopted quickly. Everyone benefit from it. And that's really because of the infrastructure and the capabilities that cloud computing provides. I also just want to make this slight distinction as far as how we look at things. There's definitely a difference between data security and data privacy. Data security is everyone's concern, and it's something that needs to be monitored on a minute-by-minute basis. You know, threats change constantly, they evolve constantly, and data security is really something I think is going to be critical around the adoption, mainstream adoption by large organizations, large enterprises around the adoption of cloud computing. But data privacy, I think, is certainly more of a policy issue, and frankly, both of those are solvable from a technology standpoint, but it's really about how do we want to address the data privacy, specifically from a policy standpoint, more than a technology standpoint. So I think I'll just close with convergence. I think that is my number one message. That's the first thing I think about when I sit down with anyone and talk about cloud computing. It's about how big data is able to be better managed because of cloud computing, because of some of the things that Amazon and others are doing. And it's about the connectivity, both to aggregate that data from mobile devices, sensors, and other things, and then the ability to deliver that back out to many different people and communities so that they can be a little more effective and also improve the outcomes of the missions that they're focused on. So thank you.
Thank you. Kyle.
All right, great. Thank you. So very excited to be here today on behalf of EMC, just to share some of our perspective. One of the things I think I'll open with is, we're talking about cloud today, and a lot of folks that I deal with on a daily basis across the federal government, as a customer base, a lot of folks see cloud as a place to go or as a destination. To us as EMC, we're really not looking to become a service provider in the cloud services market. Really what we bring to the table as it relates to cloud is all the enabling technologies to build more of a hybrid model that Mr. Howerson had mentioned earlier around management, orchestration, and a lot of the virtualization technologies. And we recognize that there is a mass amount of efficiencies that can be gained across the market, but we take more of an analytical approach on what applications should be where based on a couple of vectors, one being security and privacy, another being where is it most efficient to run that particular workload, and then most importantly in our vision is, does it meet the needs of the mission longer term. And we see this as an evolving space, and to my co-panelists, this is obviously an evolving space, and we'll see more and more adoption here. I'd also like to thank Chairman Carper for hosting today's event along with Garth, and obviously his leadership in cloud computing and data center consolidation. I would also like to thank Congressman Connolly for his leadership around transformational issues, but also we're lucky to have our federal division from EMC within his district, and we just recently opened up our executive briefing center where we're evangelizing and sharing, and I spend most days and nights in the facility sharing this message on a daily basis, so we're very excited. Obviously, thank you to the co-panelists for their service and leadership around IT transformation for our federal government, and obviously Rob for hosting today. EMC looks at this as an efficiency opportunity. This is very disruptive. We've had a lot of conversations so far around OpEx and CapEx, changes in the consumption model, and we too as well. On the panel, a lot of folks would traditionally look at EMC as building that infrastructure up front. But what we do see is a lot of traditional challenges in the market around traditional architectures, right? We have the data centers we have today based on some of the legacy infrastructure that we've built. We believe in a horizontal model, and that means horizontal within a facility, across facilities, extending out to the likes of even Amazon in those spaces, but giving customers control and choice and flexibility about where does a workload need to run, but more importantly, also creating an extensible, open, and flexible environment. If you're not familiar with EMC, EMC is traditionally thought of as a storage company. We have 4 major brands. EMC is the technology side for storage, backup and protection, and replication technologies. Most folks in the room are probably very familiar with VMware. VMware is a leader in virtualization software for most of our customer base today. And then the third company on top of that is a new initiative we just recently announced around big data, fast data, and next generation applications with a company named Pivotal, and that's headed by Paul Moritz. That is all built on a foundation of trust around our RSA and our security division. So a lot of conversations today around mobility, this explosion of devices coming into the federal mission. The other challenge around security threats that were shared earlier, we cannot go forward and do things in a manual fashion we've done in the past, right? We have to leverage things like big data, fast data, and automation to be able to manage and maintain this infrastructure. And as we start to think about diverting workloads, whether it's off-prem, on-prem, or even interagency, these become even bigger topics for us to focus on as we move forward. So as we think about this explosion of data, as more and more devices come in, obviously that explosion of data gets more and more complex, and that creates fast data problems. And we're working with federal customers today around analytics clouds that are maybe potentially forward deployed in a particular area, but today there are a lot of constraints around distributed analytical clouds and how do we do things across wires. And that's really where we're starting to do a lot of innovation around fast data, using things like in-memory database technology from a lot of our partners to really accelerate some of these capabilities, and we're really excited about that. Now, all of that being said, providing these technologies and these capabilities, this is obviously a very disruptive event across the market and in our federal customer base, and we recognize that this disruption is not easy. Within the federal government, GAO in April of 2013 shared the report around data center consolidation in the state of Gulf, and we talked about some of those metrics earlier. OMB unable to measure cost savings, and to me that's a challenge for us as we think about cloud. Cloud is very specific, and one of the things I try to articulate and evangelize with our customer base is that this has to be a data-driven decision. And as I start to look at my workloads and requirements of the applications from a technology perspective, that's very easy to do. But I need to also understand what the impact is to the mission around cost efficiency and metrics, right? Do I fully understand what it costs to serve that internally, maybe leveraging some of my internal assets? And it may, oftentimes, depending on workload, maybe it does make sense to move something externally based on a consumption-based model. That being said, we've also started to really innovate with how we go to market with things like consumption-based modeling for a lot of our core technologies as we go forward as well. So similar issues last year around OMB's goal for increasing the use of cloud computing. And I can tell you in several instances, we talked about cloud first and taking 3 applications to the cloud. I've had some customers share that they've taken multiple applications out to the cloud and have had mixed results, to be transparent. Some have gone very well, as some of the panelists have shared. Some have had mixed reviews around not truly understanding potentially their workload. And based on some of the decisions they had made and some of the metrics they had set to go to that external cloud, their assumptions were lower, and so they were paying for more because of what they were actually using. So consumption-based modeling is very attractive when we talk about consumption-based modeling as it's not paying for things I don't use, but there's a flip side to that, and you truly do need to understand what you're going to leverage and utilize from a perspective of resources as you go to that external cloud, because as you start to think about consumption, if you consume more, then you're going to see larger bills than perhaps you may have either budgeted for or had planned for as part of that consolidation. And to close, one of the things I'd like to share, and we share very frequently with our customer base, is EMC IT was no different than any of our federal customers today. We've been on a journey starting about 6 years ago on our own internal adoption of cloud technologies. We have done some major work with SAP internally around a full-blown implementation of an ERP, fully virtualized, running on internal and external infrastructure, migrating from some of our legacy stacks. This has been a very disruptive transformation for us internally around people, process, and even in some of the acquisition models. And so our CIO, Sanjay Mirkandani, has done a lot of co-conversations with a lot of the C-level leadership across the federal government, just on some of the lessons learned, how we structured our teams, and how we identified new roles that come out of this, because it's very easy to move an application to a destination, but as you start to think about management and the ongoing operations of these environments, it does come into consideration. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you, all 6 of our panels. I want to open it up for questions in just a second, but before I do that, I want to ask a couple of questions of the panels. Mike Nelson referred to this question of security and privacy, and David, I think, had the right framing. It's sort of a generalized thing where people confuse security and privacy. Privacy, to us, is a voluntary action. You make a policy about what you're going to do with data. You're going to share it, sell it, whatever. Security is an involuntary. It's something, somebody from the outside doing something to the data that you may not want. And I guess in terms of the cloud, our own thinking is that privacy is really just simply not an issue, because anybody who would sign a cloud contract would ensure that the privacy rules are the same as they would be for any federal internally held data. Security is the different question, I think, and I guess to Mike's point, I don't know that I would worry too much about NSA. It seems the NSA has just as much access to Navy data on a Navy server than they do on Navy data on a Google server, but who knows? You could be wrong on that.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the
Probably
government.
wrong.
Oh, probably wrong. They have more, it is the government accessing government data, so I think we have to recognize that. But I guess I just asked our three government folks, when you think about moving things to the cloud, how do you think about security in particular? And then maybe related to that, do you impose, I assume you impose the same privacy regime you would have for the data you might have on your own machines? Frank, you want to start?
Sure. I think, Rob, I would agree with your framework. It's about security and not about privacy. Privacy doesn't change. We take privacy very seriously in health and human services, as people might expect we do. But there are no differences as to whether the information is hosted on our own servers or in the cloud. The real issue is protection, and that's where we get to challenges that we probably don't face internally. We need to make sure we have access to everything in the cloud to determine whether or not there has in fact been a security incident, and we can track it down and see what information has been lost if that happens. That's probably the only difference.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll just say it, I certainly like the distinction between mandatory and voluntary, but from a security perspective, we're requiring all of our cloud solutions to have FISMA moderate certification. So, that actually forces folks to put a little more emphasis and effort into the security controls. From a privacy perspective, we want to make sure that as we move our information out there to public clouds, is that it's not being reused or misused or used in any other capacity, because some of the information is sensitive. So it's more of a, from my perspective, more of a terms of service agreement, and how's the information going to be used, or could you be used, and making sure it is protected.
Anybody else?
Yeah, there's also an element of,
Agreed.
there's also an element of risk whenever you put anything to anybody else. So while our privacy policies are the same, obviously if I'm holding the data internally, I have a lot more control over it. Now, that data may cost me more, so what I have to evaluate is, what's the trade space? Where do I say that I can live with less control over that data, less oversight of the data? While I believe that all of my commercial partners have good intent to protect data and to ensure the privacy, it's like anything else. The more I expose the greater number of people to the data, the higher chance that that data can be compromised. That's just a fact. So one of the things we have to look at, particularly inside the Department of Navy, is the value of the individual data, both from a privacy and a value to you as taxpayers too. I guarantee you there is some data that you want to make sure that I own, I operate, and I keep that sphere of influence and control very small. And we should pay whatever price that takes to do. Our challenge is, how do you keep that to the smallest amount of data possible and get the majority of our data in more cost-effective environments? And it will be a blended environment across the board. And some of it will never be in cloud. And I say ever, so you shouldn't say ever. Ever in terms of technology, it won't be in the next 5 to 10 years move to a cloud. It will not make economic sense for some of that data to go there, based on where the applications is, how it's used. I don't want us to lose sight of that is the bigger problem. We talk about cloud and we tend to think that cloud is just as a current. We talk about data centers as a standalone. There's no standalone here. And the one thing that's interesting, we're all in the internet business, we're all in the connectivity business. We sometimes forget it's all connected. Your solutions and your strategy have to be total. They can't be just one-offs. You really have to have a total strategy.
I'll go Kyle and then.
Sure, I'd add on to that, with a trust but verify kind of strategy. Obviously with FedRAMP and continuous monitoring and capabilities, there's that expectation that whatever workload we take to a particular provider will provide those security components. But our strategy from an RSA perspective is really to take a data-centric approach. Understanding that if I move a workload, whether it's on-prem or off-prem, that I can have a common tool set to be able to understand things like STIX compliance and where am I from an ongoing visibility perspective, giving common tool sets in that hybrid fashion. And that becomes very, very important, but also introducing some of the automation into those components. So, it can't just be about protecting the virtual machine, right? We're getting to a point where things are going to be mobile in a much faster fashion than we've ever seen before. And so as we start to think about this, we really need to think a little bit more focus on the data side of it, right? And that's where we're kind of working and developing a lot of our tool sets and capabilities.
Matt, did you want to?
I just wanted to kind of reiterate the spectrum idea that these things are, that your solutions and the applications that support the mission effectively exist on a spectrum. And I'm not such a zealot that I don't understand that there are some workloads, the legacy stuff that runs on an alpha box somewhere under someone's desk that's probably not a good fit to move to the cloud. But the approach that we take to securing that is the core to pretty much everything that we do. And we have a shared responsibility model that we work with our customers. So we undertake the responsibility of securing the infrastructure of the services. So that's everything from the foundations of our data centers all the way up to the hypervisors of our virtual machines. All of that's on us. And we have certification and all the checks and balances you would expect around that. So service level controls, SSU 1 and 2, ISO 27001, we have an ITAR certified region for ITAR workloads, PCI DSS level 1 compliance, we have authority to operate with FedRAMP and FISMA moderate and all these sort of things. But beyond that, it's actually our customer's responsibility to secure that information. So the operating system which runs inside the virtual machine, the application that runs on that operating system, the data that is stored within that, it's our customer's responsibility to secure that. Now we'll give the tools and the best practices and everything like that to do it, but understanding where to use encryption, the right encryption methods to use, all those sort of things, that's the responsibility of our customers. And understanding that trade-off and that balance is very important.
David, and then Joe, and then I want to come back to the audience.
Certainly, I just to add one other piece of complexity to the conversation of data security and data privacy. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, and actually as Terry was talking, it popped into my head because that's kind of what we're seeing. It's this hybrid approach to kind of mission critical core on-premise, innovation in the cloud, the ability to have that be kind of securely managed. But the additional topic, which I think is related in a lot of ways, is who owns the data? Especially as you transform data between your own enterprise systems, potentially to cloud-based software as a service, but cloud-based applications that then will transform or substantially augment that data over a period of time. Who owns that data? And a lot of customers are starting to feel that that's a major term and condition that they need to understand better as they're adopting more and more, becoming more and more dependent on cloud-based applications. That they don't find themselves overly dependent. It's so easy to switch to a cloud provider, and all the models are there to do that from a cost standpoint. But how do you then switch if it then is very, very disruptive then to your business because there are some questions around the data ownership. So I think just one last piece around data ownership, I think, is the other piece of kind of the data lineage that really needs to be addressed as cloud computing becomes more widely adopted.
So one thing I was thinking about when Terry was saying about the government has a little more control over this. I mean, one of the great advantages of a cloud solution is that it's constantly, the solution and the services are constantly being refreshed and upgraded and maintained, and you're, to a large degree, you're pleasantly surprised about having new functionality or new capability that is delivered on a regular basis that you don't have to pay for. But what that does is it can really impact your controls, and you now have a service provider managing the software, you have a facility that maybe is in Amazon's cloud and so on, and how do you connect all these pieces together? So you do this great security assessment overall, looking at all your controls, and it's really hard to keep track of in these cloud solutions about a new enhancement, a new change, what that's doing to your overall security posture. That's something I think we need to have a better understanding of how we go forward on that. You know, is my security risk posture changed at all with this new feature, new enhancement, new capability, and it's very difficult to tell.
I think it's important, we do have an analog in the analog world, and that's money. I don't know how many of you keep your money at home? So we have this really, really valuable thing we call money, and we actually give it to this place down the block, and we think they're trustworthy because that's their business to be trustworthy. So, yes, sir.
Question. I'm from Department of Justice and I'm in the security field. Thanks for all the comments on things, but from a traditional IT, cloud is just another transformation of remote hosting into that. Obviously, good talk on all the benefits we are getting, but one of the key aspects, this is a two-part question. The first part, government can answer. The second part, the service providers can answer is, the operational aspect of cloud deployment is how do I know that you're doing the right stuff, right? From a security and the continuous monitoring, right? So this is a question for the government is lessons learned for the last 2 years. Where were the challenges or what have you done in actually, obviously FedRAMP is there, but the CM side is still not mature enough to figure out the continuous feeds and what you're doing. The question is, what were the challenges and how did you manage that? And from a service provider is now you have 50 or 100 government entities saying, I need my report this way, I need my feed this way, or I need my patch management report, I need my incident response, which has not been standardized. If each one of you can talk about the challenges you faced on the continuous monitoring side of cloud.
Well, somebody from the government side answer the first part. Eric?
So I would tell you that the first thing we did, you'll notice that our Amazon contract is public-facing data. One of the reasons for that is I'm a little less concerned with public-facing data getting out to the public. So we're moving into the cloud by looking at our data value structure. And you are right, part of the problem is going to be how do you get all the feeds? Now, we've had quite a bit of experience inside the Department of Navy with service as a provider. Many of you here have heard the term the Navy Marine Corps Internet. Just recently changed to Next Generation. So we've had a big experience with a service provider. And I'll tell you, one of the challenges, and you saw in NGEN, the biggest change between NGEN and NMCI is we have brought back command and control of our network back inside the government. That is the single biggest change in NGEN from MCI. And the reason for that is the problems you addressed. You can't, without having that C2, we don't think we can effectively ensure everything that's happened. And that doesn't mean we're not going to have commercial. If you've seen it, HP, the new HP team won the NGEN contract. Customers won't see any difference in their service levels initially, but we will be able to have much more inside and continual monitoring. Now, we've had a long time to work with that infrastructure. How do we get faster at that as we go to different commercial partners and do that? It's going to be a big challenge. It's why we are stepping out, understanding the value of the data and the data that we're putting out there first. I think that's what we're going to have to continue to do.
I would say we're in the early stages right now of figuring this out, so I don't have a complete answer, but I can tell you we're going into it with our eyes wide open. And in the ATOs that we're negotiating right now and approving, part of it is actually working with the vendor to do what Kyle mentioned, trust but verify. So we're getting a real-time continuous monitoring feed that's going into a dashboard. We're watching that, and where we have suspicions of something going awry, we intervene very quickly.
Much the same situation. We get, we do a continuous monitoring or annual reassessment of the security posture. What I'd really like to have is real-time raw audit logs of how things are going. Most companies will not provide that. They'll provide summary information. But if I can have real-time audit logs, that would be ideal to our security operations center.
So Matt, do you have a challenge of getting 20 different types of requests? I mean,
Well, it's a challenge we're happy to live with, I think. So the fact that multiple people are coming to us, both in the public and the private sector, with a very, very different set of requirements, is actually a good thing, because we get to listen to all of these guys. We get to listen to Shell and to Samsung and to Netflix and to NASA and all of these guys, right? And we get to then take all of that and build on top of it for the entire platform. So we actually welcome multiple points of input. To the sort of points of output, we're quite happy to share as much information as we can under NDA with our customers and provide the sort of reports that people need. We've also built a lot of sort of technical tools to allow customers to effectively bring their existing network and all of their access controls and their identity management and all of those sort of federated systems directly up onto AWS, and even connect with that with dedicated fiber directly into our data centers. So you can basically see the AWS cloud as just an extension with your own IP addresses and your public and private subnets and all those sort of things. So you can bring a lot of your existing technologies. Anything that's missing, we can work with you to build.
I'd answer this in two parts. The first is, in your definition of the question, reports. That means something happened, right? I want to know what happened, and maybe it's a configuration management component and things of that nature.
Yeah, just the word reports versus continuous monitoring.
Okay.
What we just said. I mean, I would like to know if 100 privileged users were created as an event to me directly versus an annual report.
Sure, so we have a couple different layers of assistance here. The first is more a dashboard view between even Amazon and others out in the market or an on-prem solution. You can look at a configuration compliance around, does it meet STIGs, does it meet PCI, all these things. And these are policies that are out of the box, right? And as customers come to us and they say we have specific requirements, whether it's nuclear security controls, those become developed, right, as an overall standard. And so we get the scale as we have hundreds and hundreds of these. So out of the box, you can get that in a dashboard format. We actually have a federal customer today who has an on-premise solution and an off-premise solution today with Amazon, and they're leveraging that for their compliance and visibility in a FISMA moderate configuration, right? So that's key, to give visibility on just that configuration element around those specific guidelines and regulations. The second side, and I think Joe's point around continuous monitoring, that feeds in. I'd love to have a real-time dashboard to know from on this endpoint, I've got this type of traffic coming in. It's a challenge, right? This is a big data problem. There are so many packets coming into the networks, and this stuff is explosive and growing astronomically, and so this becomes a big data problem. What we've done is started to infuse the analytics components that we have, and we bring to market with specific products and start to infuse that into the RSA suite, right? And so now what we've started to do in our own CERC and our Security Incident Response Center at EMC is leverage those analytic platforms to give us near, right, as near real time as we can on a lot of the trends. What's interesting is you start to glom all this data together, you start to see trends that you couldn't see from disparate endpoints. And we can start to potentially look at new attack vectors, new targets, and potentially new enemy states that we hadn't been focused on in the past. This is a multi-layer conversation, but definitely we're providing a lot of value, probably up and down that entire stack.
any questions? Yes, sir, and then Mike.
Yes, thanks, Rob. Great program. My name is Josh Galper. I'm with Personal.com, a startup here in Washington that gives individuals data vaults to source, share, and reuse their own information. One topic that hasn't been covered today is, I feel, is open data and all the initiatives around open data coming from the administration. I wonder how that impacts thinking about governing the cloud, systems and controls that need to be in place, and either from a hosting provider or from some of the government. I was curious about your points of view on that.
Well, I guess I'd say part of the White House digital government strategy is really a focus on APIs, and we're looking to those APIs as a mechanism for ensuring that only the right information is shared under the right circumstances, right? So, you know, government has a lot of information about individuals, and to the extent that we allow individuals to go in and get that information and aggregate it, I think we're going to provide much better customer service. So we're aiming in that direction. The controls just need to be in place, and I think that APIs provide that. And if you go agency by agency across the federal government, and you look at what information needs to be shared and under what circumstances, that's probably where we're going to come out. Each agency is going to have to decide that for themselves.
How much does the 74 Privacy Act limit all this, though, Frank? Because it essentially was an act that said never ever share data between agencies. You know, I'm exaggerating, but sort of was its intent, because there was all this fear of the. And now we're in a world where you can share, and sharing can be good. And you know, is that something Congress needs to be revisiting?
I don't know that I could speak to the Privacy Act. I'm not an expert in that area, and I wouldn't want to, sitting here in Congress. That being said, I think that there is, the technology changes. And one of the things that I was probably most surprised by when I came into government service, it's been about 4 years now, when I first started at Social Security, I just assumed that government shared information. And when I began to find out about all the interagency data exchange agreements that go on, and literally hundreds and sometimes thousands, agency by agency on a case-by-case basis, it really does create some inefficiencies.
Matt, did you want to talk a little bit about the...
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that open data is a good example of the sort of shared model of the cloud, right? So when I think about open data, I think about data which has already been through this vetting process, which is where there is an understanding that this is information which has a remit to be shared. And there's now an executive order to kind of facilitate this across government agencies. And so once that decision has been made that this doesn't compromise privacy, this doesn't compromise security, this data should be shared, what you get is actually a huge amount of economic impact, because there's a lot of value locked away in that data. There's a lot of value then where you can start to aggregate different types of data. So you can start to aggregate information from the fire service, with information from the weather service, with information from the traffic service, right? You can just imagine the sort of tools that you could build around that. The challenge in doing that is that sort of integration can be quite data intensive. And pulling together and experimenting with that data can be very, very challenging for governments, but also for the general public. So if you want to realize that sort of economic benefit, where you want people to go off and build additional services and add additional value to that data, you have to do it in an environment which sort of enables that experimentation and innovation with that data. And we actually run a public data set program for that specific purpose. So we'll host open data for free. So the 1,000 genome data set that I mentioned earlier is a good example of that. We're working with NASA on some new planetary data, and we're working with a bunch of other census information and other things that are open. You can just pull all that data together and start working with it. And having the data available in a utility environment where anybody can start experimenting with it is extremely powerful.
I'll echo it. I mean, David's example of that particular app that I think we all use is extremely powerful. Location-based services, right, value add to me as an individual, saving time in my day, you know, helping me get to places more effectively. The disparate data sources we have today are powerful, but when you start to mash these together, you get enormous power. But with that kind of mashup of these disparate data sources through open data, the challenge, you know, to I think Dr. Wood's point is, this is not an easy concept, right? There's not necessarily a single interface that we can call or an API, right? If you look at an industry vertical, you can look at the healthcare space with HL7 interfaces that have been traditionally standardized, and you can have kind of a much easier flow of data between different data sources and creation points. So it is going to be very powerful, but I think at the same time, it's going to take, to Dr. Wood's point, experimentation. There's going to be some work that has to go into that to figure out how do we pull in some of those pieces. That's outside the people and the politic challenge, right?
Mike.
Representative Connolly kind of laid out the big challenge here. He said, wait a minute, we haven't seen the progress we expected. The president made this bold challenge. Vivek Kunder laid out the Cloud First initiative. And a lot of agencies, many that aren't on the panel, haven't done what we expected to see them do. We heard a few hints as to why that hasn't happened. The Privacy Act was mentioned, the slow implementation of FedRAMP. I personally think that the concerns about who's getting access to the cloud is a concern. I'd just like to hear from each of you, what's the one thing that you think is keeping agencies from moving to the cloud? Is it culture? Is it the fact that the Congress seems to be on and off about this? Sometimes they hold a hearing and say it's good, the next day they cut the budget for cloud implementation. And then of course we have lobbyists for companies that aren't cloud providers who don't like people moving away from mainframes and install-based.
Sure, I can share, right? And obviously, I meet with a lot of customers, obviously, many more than are on the panel today, and it's all the above, right? There's many, and I would say most, that are, they understand it's directed, they understand it's the goal, they don't know where to start. It's almost paralysis by analysis. They don't have a framework, they haven't been through this. Their legacy infrastructures are very complex, they're stovepipe, they have policies around this. Then there's the acquisition cycle. Hey, if I want to do X, how do I handle that? How do I even procure that service? How do I put those acquisition, programs together? That immediately creates a false wall for them, and they kind of pump the brakes. The other side of it too is not necessarily, and this is not a criticism, but not necessarily truly understanding the impact of the enterprise they're supporting or the mission they're supporting today. What is where? How many applications do I have? How many applications are duplicative across my environment? And so we're really kind of evangelizing with our customers is there's a way to take a stepped approach to this, standardize, virtualize, automate, and then obviously start to look at what it costs to serve the enterprise and the mission, and then get that baseline. But I think there's so many aspects. I personally couldn't point to one, but I can tell you some have moved workloads just because they were told to by order, right? And that wasn't, they just picked an application off the tree. Are they getting, to the quote earlier, better results for less money? To be determined. They didn't necessarily know what it was costing to serve for those particular applications. So I think it's all of the above, in my personal opinion.
I'll just throw out a crazy idea. We ended up closing a lot of military bases that needed to be closed to save DoD a lot of money because DoD didn't want to close some and Congress didn't want the others closed. What about a data center closure commission? You fess up all your data centers and you identify the top 10% that are the most costly, least efficient, and somebody decides that those are the ones that are going to get closed across the government.
It's really hard to do though. I promised myself I would be quiet on the data center issue, but I can't keep it. Stop worrying about the number of data centers. That's not the metric. It is absolutely not the metric. The metric is how much am I paying to store all the data collectively? So, we're looking at that in a collective manner. There's going to be some data centers I'm going to leave open, but here's what I'm going to do inside the Department of Navy, and I think my colleagues are the same. I'm taking $1.4 billion out of my data center costs. Okay, gone. Money is gone. There are some places where it absolutely makes sense, given the new technology, for me to put a data pod right next to the user. Cheapest way to do it. Don't even worry about the buildings, the data center. That's not where your costs are. Understand the cost. Get the metric of drop the cost of what it's costing for your data, and don't get focused on the complete number of data centers. I mean, somebody in here give me a definition that we all agree to of a data center. We've had, I don't know, 25, 30. Look at what you're doing with your data. Look at the best way to meet the mission where that data is. And then look at the pricing. And I think that's where we have got to focus our time and stop counting the number of data centers and use metrics that, okay, we've closed 23 data centers. I'm not even sure what closing a data center sometimes means. We aren't a business. And that is something to remember about the federal government, and I'll speak to the Department of Navy. So sometimes what business can do when they close a data center, they sell the land, they stop the lease. I don't get that savings. So I really want to focus on what's the cost around the data. Most of my data centers are not standalone buildings. They're in buildings that are used for other things. So closing the data center is not going to get some of the savings that I hear other people talk about. Now there's savings, and we're banking on it. We've taken the money. There's big savings in managing your data totally better, using better options. The trick is knowing the value of the data, where the users are. We'll talk about, we talk about COBOL. COBOL is an old language. Some cases, we should keep it. It works. It works really well. And for non-distributed apps where you have your app used by a large group of centrally located people, great way to keep your costs down. In other cases, you change it and you want to change the language and you got to change your whole process and applications that go around it. And that costs money to do. So you've got to be able to make sure you've made the business case that says, hey, not only going to close the way I store this data, but I got to change the way the data is processed. I got to change the app. And some of those legacy apps are expensive, and to just some scale numbers I think we should recognize. And I'll only talk to the dumb. So I have one network that has 897,000 people on it. That's a big number. Physics alone, just people say, well, why can't you do this faster? If I patch everything perfectly, running at the highest optimum speeds, you have an 897,000 person network. How many people service Antarctica here? How many service space? Physics says it takes me a certain amount of time to get that done. So I do think you've got to remember all of those aspects when you're looking at your whole IT cyber environment. You really, I can't keep preaching enough. You've got to really understand, and I think the point that you have to understand all parts of your environment. And then develop a solution set that addresses all of it in total, not just pick pieces of your environment and say, I'm going to do it. It won't work.
I do bet that your cooling cost for your data center in Antarctica is pretty low.
It is, and it's very effective. Sometimes it even gets a little too cool.
Anybody else want
No,
to?
if I could just pick up on what Mike was saying, is why is it, what's the one thing, that's taking you a long time to move to the cloud? I would say one is that we're actually moving as fast as anybody to the cloud, and I don't have some of the challenges that Terry has, but, and I certainly, we go through business cases, make sure that this is going to be beneficial to the government, to the taxpayers ultimately, because some of our data centers are the equivalent of comm closets, you know, a rack or two of equipment, and it's strategically placed, and it's as efficient as you can make it. But the one thing really is putting together the acquisitions for these cloud services. And then within the acquisition is the requirements definition. Because when we moved to Google Mail, we had 19 different email systems. Everybody had their favorite. So how do you get everybody together to agree on what are the core set of requirements I must have, and I can live with whatever comes out the other end. Moving our tier 1 service desk, you know, to the cloud and ServiceNow technology, the people in technology in the cloud, I've got at least 39 tier 1 help desks across the country, and they're all using different technology bases, different tools, different people. I mean, there's a myriad of issues, but if I can get everybody to agree on a set of requirements, then we can go pretty fast. And then beyond that, the transition doesn't happen overnight. So you talk about moving your operations to the cloud. It can take some time, but again, the biggest thing is getting the acquisition together, getting that out, and then once that happens, things start moving pretty quickly. But within that, the requirements are key.
Great. So I promised people we'd be out by 11:30. I'm going to just say 3 quick things. One, if you want to share this with any colleagues, there'll be a video of the event that should be up on our website, itif.org, tomorrow morning. Secondly, if you're interested in more work we've done on cloud or e-government, just again, go to our website. And finally, just would add, we've initiated a new project excuse me, at ITIF called the Center for Data Innovation, and where we're looking at what are the real opportunities both here in the United States and around the world on data innovation. And my colleague Travis Cortland, stand up Travis, is leading that effort for ITIF, so if you're interested in that, feel free to just touch base with Travis. So I want to thank this great panel of experts and for the insights they had today, and thank you for all coming, and please join me in thanking our panelists.